my picture because Bernie said I was looking good for me. And Kevin and Anoa, come on up here with me. But Bernie mentioned the sign. Yeah, I'm emotional about water too, perhaps not quite as much as Jeannie, but water should make everyone emotional and fierce. And the Friends of Water sign is iconic to us, but while people worldwide, would say they're Friends of Water, they are not living in the eastern coal fields, and maybe it's in other coal fields, but they don't see on their basketball court floor and on other people's cars and on the official license plate, Friends of Coal. And so it is just so important that we have that sign, that we keep that sign, and in this case, it is on a 42-inch hoop. 42 inches is what the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline are. They are that big, going across our highlands, across the Appalachian Trail, through untold numbers of streams and rivers. And as you know, a 30-inch pipeline that was built in January by TransCanada, who builds other pipelines through West Virginia, blew up despite all the assurances of how safe and state-of-the-art those pipelines are. So the threat is real, the devastation is happening, and if Chris were here, Friends of Water would be so busy, because you know how ubiquitous Friends of Water was when we had Chris. And Friends of Water still makes a post now and then, and in grappling with the loss of Chris, one thing that I could do productively was, because I'm kind of the queen of the Facebook message, but as I looked around and I met Dave during this, I met Anoa during this, I met people who had some rights to work on the Facebook page from the local groups in Kentucky and Ohio and Michigan and here. But knowing Chris, he was the only administrator. So we still have to work on keeping it up. But we have OVEC, Vivian is here, who's maintaining Friends of Water and also working very hard against the pipelines. April Pearson-Keating, who has done an amazing job of trying to keep track of all the pipelines snaking everywhere throughout the Appalachian region and given us a new fossil fuel colonialism that Denise does such a good job on the coal, and we're doing it again, and I'm getting worked up. So, one of the really wondrous things about kind of following Chris and figuring out what I could figure out about Facebook was the amazing connections that he had. Because sometimes I will become a friend of someone that has to do with Standing Rock or some kind of high-powered person that manages to friend me, and I look at our mutual friends, and Chris Hale is really often a mutual friend, and so he really did reach out. I mean, he was that candle that lit other candles everywhere, and we miss him. And I know that Anoa Changa and Kevin Thompson were very important in his life, and so I'm going to sit down and let them talk a little bit about their experience of Chris Hale.
Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you, Bernie, and thank you, DL, for even letting me know this was happening and asking me to come up. I drove up from Atlanta earlier with my kids. Chris was really amazing. Like, he had a real knack for finding people and definitely for collecting and getting out needed information, particularly in those that first month of the chemical spill, right? Because we had Ken J. Ward, who's amazing as a journalist, but the Friends of Water Facebook page really served as an information hub. And over time, that's like when I really first started blogging, and that's kind of how I think we got connected. But Chris started using the Facebook page also to collect people's stories and to help give voice to so many of us who had been impacted by the chemical spill, who weren't getting responses from then, state health official Dr. Tierney or any other official, that we were supposed to be able to get answers from. And his passion and at times his frustration, since he was in Florida when that first happened, really drove him to seek out other folks, Dave, myself, David had coffee, like so many of us, to kind of help figure out what can we do. And I really feel like in some ways, Chris was like really at the forefront of like the digital organizing space. I don't know if he saw it that way at the time, but we see now how Facebook, how social media is really being used to drive people to action. And Friends of Water in 2014 was really doing some cutting edge, I think, mobilization efforts to really help people be empowered and lift their voices. And that's something that I hold really dearly from what I learned from Chris in this whole experience. Unfortunately, Chris and I never actually crossed paths in real life. Our friendship was online and on the phone. We had many phone calls. As Bernie mentioned, I was really excited when I actually got to talk to Chris about some of his work on my podcast. And like, I attribute some of my own political work now to what I started doing with Chris back in 2014. Because when people ask me, like, how did you get radicalized? How did you get active? Well, I had activistic parents and stuff. But I really feel like in 2014, when this came to our doorstep, it woke something up in all of us. And Chris provided a space for those of us to have a voice, to be able to be empowered and engaged. And he also worked with, there was the Easy Action of the Day page that was blasting out, so he would also signal boost other efforts from other organizations and other groups too. Like, Chris just really had a communal spirit that was focused on lifting up everyone and really making sure that we had champions. But not just some outside, national org, but something that was homegrown and grassroots. And, Friends of Water is a brilliant idea, and I really do hope we do find a way to ramp things up and keep things going. But, I was really happy. I'm really happy when that interview with Chris comes up in my memories, because he was so knowledgeable. Right? He did make so many great connections, but he was so knowledgeable about issues, and not just his one, sometimes you have people who have a specific issue and they're just focused on that, but he could see how it related to so many other areas in politics. And he also talked in such a way that was so easily to understand that, even if you were someone who wasn't an environmental person, because people act like, that's a special thing, he had a way of reaching people, and connecting with folks so that they understood that, hey, this really does matter to all of us. And so I really appreciate his work. And the last thing I'll say is, like, he was a great people connector. Like, I got to interview Charlotte Pritt when she was in her race for governor. That was like sometime early, like October, I think it was. He was doing some work with her campaign. He connected me to her too, because Chris was really looking at how do we help people get power to really make decisions and control in their lives. And I was telling Kevin earlier, I was thankful for Chris, because he'd ping me and let me know, like, hey, the settlement stuff is moving along. You got to make sure you fill out your form. So, like, Chris was just amazing all the way around. And it's so wild to think about, a lot of us grew up, we didn't have technology and stuff like this, but you can be so close to someone and never actually shared physical presence with them. But Chris is definitely missed, but I am so enthusiastic when I see postings and stuff from other folks, because I know that his work and his spirit, continues on.
So I met Chris during the water crisis. I think we might have run past during the war on coal, but the water crisis was where he really came to the forefront, I believe. And Friends of Water was instrumental. Before Chris and I became involved with each other's efforts, he was forwarding the effort to get to the bottom of the water crisis by continually keeping it at the forefront and making sure that the 225,000 people that were affected knew what was going on and had the latest information, and that's why he had so many followers. During the crisis, in the aftermath of the crisis, throughout the pendence of the lawsuit, throughout the settlement, Chris was always available to me and useful in so many ways beyond just being some guy who knew how to use Facebook. And then, Chris introduced me to people. He let me know about things that were happening. Many times when Dr. Welton would put something up that was important to all of us, I'd learn about it from Chris before I'd learn about it from Dr. Welton or any of the experts I hired. When one of the important parts of the settlement is the value for the businesses. The residential values were fairly easy to figure out. There's established formulas for that. For how much it's worth when someone doesn't have water, and there's all kinds of economists that have written all kinds of paper about that. But The actual effect on the businesses was something where Chris was important, because in the mediation process, that's the first time I really ever saw Facebook deployed so effectively. Is he reached out to the business community and got businesses to just, on the trust of driving people to our website, to give up important financial information and data and share it, of course, on a confidential basis, but still to go to the effort to determine that, so we could prove to the insurers, because everything in the world always comes down to insurers, to prove to the insurers that there really was a business loss and there really was a crisis. And like most people in the community, I remember, and almost everyone else remembers, where they were when they found out that the water was unsafe. And by shining a light on that moment and what that means, I think Chris reaches beyond the area here. And as far as shining a candle, kind of like a Christmas story, what happens if Jimmy isn't there? Well, what's happened if Chris wasn't there? Well, number one, we had to go through a settlement process without him, and it was more expensive, more difficult, and not as effective. Number two, water keeps getting threatened. When Hurricane Harvey came in, chemical plant in Houston blew up. I ended up in the middle of that, and I remember right at the bat thinking, damn, I wish Chris was here, because that's who I would have turned to spread the information we were gathering. So he certainly was a candle that lit other candles, and without him, I wouldn't have learned how to communicate with people who use Facebook and how to do these things. I think DL too. I think it kind of drove us into accepting that social media might be an important way to communicate with people. And Chris certainly was a communicator and a water warrior par excellence.